Every Torah portion overflows with countless teachings. That being said, this week's Torah portion really overflows. We have a detailed description of the mysterious ritual of the sacrifice of the red heifer. We have the famous story of Moses hitting the rock against God's instructions and the subsequent punishment of not being allowed to enter the land of Israel. We have the Canaanites fighting the Israelites, and we have the Amorites fighting the Israelites, and the Bashanites fighting the Israelites. There's also a description of a seraph, a copper figure mounted on a pole that can heal whoever looks upon it. There is a lot going on in these 3 chapters of our Torah. With so much going on, it's easy for some things to get overlooked. Toward the beginning of the portion, we read, "V'tamat sham Miriam v'tikaver sham," and Miriam died there and was buried there. 5 words, 1/2 of 1 verse. There are 2 ways to look at this. For those of us not used to reading Torah, this might seem like an insult. That's all she gets? 5 words? But Torah is famously economical when it comes to language. The fact that the Torah mentions Miriam at all, let alone that both she died and was buried, is a sign both of her significance and the honor the Torah bestows upon her. But, on the other hand, 5 words? Out of context, that still doesn't sound very good. And in context, I think it actually sounds worse, because Miriam was not the only person whose death is recorded in this week's Torah portion. About a chapter later, her brother, Aaron, also is gathered to his kin. And what happens to Aaron? He gets 7 verses. And if we read them, we learn that upon his death, the Israelites observed Shloshim, 30 days of public mourning, memorializing the loss of Aaron. There is no mention of this mourning for Miriam, the implication being that it didn't happen. In our own time, many have filled in what the Torah has left out about Miriam. We have songs dedicated to her. We have a Torah commentary named in her honor. In our prayer book, we have included her in the Mi Chamocha alongside her brother Moses. Even if you don't go to Torah study regularly, 8:45 a.m. tomorrow morning, bagels and lox. Even if you don't go regularly, you've probably heard the name Miriam, and that's more than you can say for someone like Terach. Anyone know who Terach was? Abraham's father. Exactly. But still, her relatively recent revival feels a little bit off. It should make us all proud that our movement, the Reform movement, had the theological courage to include her in the Mi Chamocha. But it doesn't address the reality that the original wording in the Torah did not. Furthermore, there's only so much that we can do. Just how do you go about constructing a biography millennia after a life? Imagine a future world where people are left only with lines such as Golda Meir was an Israeli prime minister. Martin Luther King was a great orator. And based off that alone, this generation is tasked with filling in the rest. We know Miriam was important, and not just because the Torah mentions her. The Torah tells us she was a prophet, but doesn't tell us what she said. She was important, but we don't know why. Furthermore, Rabbi Bradley Artson acknowledges an uncomfortable truth. Today, Miriam's fame rests less on any specific accomplishment and more on the fact that she was a woman. We end up celebrating her for what she was rather than who she was. Artson continues, 3,000 years ago, being a woman was the disqualification from public recognition or accomplishment. With so few female heroes, Miriam stands out precisely because we are now more sensitive to just how difficult it is for a woman to gain public recognition. For us to even know the name Miriam means she was extraordinary. But the tragedy is that we are left to imagine how that extraordinary character actually manifested herself. But what to do with the idea that her popularity is the result of nothing more than a contemporary desire to elevate a female character? Most of us probably don't realize that Judaism's fascination with Miriam is not new. Perhaps recognizing one half of one verse was not enough. Our tradition was compelled to add more. Rabbinic commentators were fascinated by what comes immediately after this half verse of Miriam's death. The Torah continues, the community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. Rather than see it as evidence that Miriam's death was just an insignificant blip in the narrative, our tradition concludes her death must be connected to that story of what comes next with the lack of the water. And if we delve deeper, we see a pattern. Miriam, she is there when baby Moses floats down the Nile, and she is there singing on the shores of the Red Sea. And she's here with her death leading to drought. And from this connection, the tradition develops that Miriam was not just associated with water, but she was the cause of it. That throughout the entire Exodus narrative, with countless mentions of Vayomer Adonai El Moshe ve'Aharon, God spoke to Moses and Aaron, Miriam was there too, in the background, with her bottomless well, sustaining all of Israel. The Mishnah goes so far as to state that her well was so important, God didn't wait to create it when the time was that it was needed, but rather God created it in the moment that God finished the creation of the world in the beginning of Shabbat. But yet, all of this is by necessity speculation and imagination. It's a testament to our Jewish tradition that long before our generation, women and men recognized Miriam deserved a story. But it's a shame that we had to be the ones to provide it, because the Torah did not. But that's the lesson we can learn from this. Her treatment does not have to be repeated. We certainly seem to be realizing this lesson as a larger culture. In 4 days, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of landing humans on the moon. We now know that we got there based on the computational power of some 400 women, many of which were African Americans. In the 1960s, their contribution was largely unrecognized. One of the lead mathematicians, Katherine Johnson, was a name that few of us knew. 50 years later, NASA has named a building after her. And that is but one example of the recent interest in re-examining our greatest moments and who got us there. I want to conclude with a thought and a challenge. Where does that leave us? When we talk about Miriam, when we add her to our prayers, we say that her story matters, that she matters. And that's important, but it isn't enough if we don't extend that to all the Miriams around us, all of those engaged in important and holy work that we don't always think of as important or holy. We can't give Miriam the eulogy she deserves, but maybe that's okay. It's okay, so long as we can learn from her story. May we learn to value every member of our community for every contribution that they make. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will.